It's so great to be here today. I feel really privileged to be working with HITEC over the past few years, so with the Data Citizens projects. And, you know, I've come to know the HITEC Familia through Patricia, through Omar, Susanna. And, you know, I've learned that it's about community, it's about relationships, and ultimately it's about trust. And of course, having fun. But and with the trust part, you know, we started thinking a little bit about topics that would be relevant, given a lot of the focus yesterday on AI and Gen AI. And we came up with AI and data ethics, and really wanting to drill down on that concept of responsible AI, and specifically the ethical components of it. And we sat down with Omar and Patricia, and we said, how can we leverage the power of the HITEC community, all the experience that you all have, the deep, deep experience working with data, working with AI on not just a weekly, monthly, daily basis, in some cases hourly basis. So, you know, it's all about, well, is there a way we can collect that experience, package it up, and get it back out to the community so those that are earlier on the journey can benefit from the experience of others. And so that's what we did. So about 3 weeks ago, we sent out a survey. We got hundreds of responses back, so thank you very much those that participated. And a lot of what we're going to do here, we don't have a ton of time. We could spend probably 2 hours going through some of the details. We will publish a formal report in about a month's time that we'll distribute to all of you. So you'll have the details and the benefits of what we heard from you all. And I think this will be helpful because, you know, for those of you, you know, more advanced on the journey of AI and data ethics, this will help corroborate, yeah, we're on the right direction, we're in good company. For those of you earlier in the journey, this will provide you a sneak peek in what some of the others are doing well, and what some of the things, bumps in the road they may have or be anticipating. So, to go through all of those results, I want to introduce you to Reverend Gwen Russell. Now, Gwen works for me. She has many hats in KPMG and elsewhere. She is a data ethicist. She runs my data governance and handling team. She also is the executive director of our AI and Data Ethics Institute. And you'll notice the Reverend in front of her name. On weekends, she actually leads her parishioners and works through ethical dilemma, ethical problems in a pragmatic and actionable way. And so a couple of years ago, when Gwen and I were working on this topic of AI and data ethics, we said, you know, there's got to be a way, we got to harness that approach, that power, that pragmatism, and bring that to this area, this space that can often be a little bit murky and a little bit academic in some cases, and not as actionable and specific. So Gwen, welcome to the stage, and look forward to our debrief.
Yeah, and thanks for the introduction. You know, as a minister and a professional, what I've realized is that ethics is really a practice, and it's a practice for people that are concerned, pragmatists that are concerned. It can't really be a journey for idealists, right? You can take that journey, but you don't end up where you want to be. So what I can tell you, Bob, is looking at the results of the survey, we have a lot of concerned pragmatists in the audience. So let's jump in and see what we found.
All right. Let's start with why AI and data ethics matters. I clearly, from yesterday, there's a lot of concern out there. But Gwen, take us through what we found.
So before we get started on that slide, I wanted to give a little bit about definitions, because definitions are important, and we're going to see that a little bit later in the survey. And responsible AI, we hear that term, we hear trustworthy AI, we hear ethics, AI and data ethics, and they're similar, but there's some nuances. So responsible AI is really about implementation. So how do I implement an AI solution that is trustworthy and ethical? And that includes all the typical implementation things that we do all the time, right? So we do controls, we do processes, we do governance that manages risk, and in this particular circumstance, manages the risk of AI. AI and data ethics is there's a nuance there. It's really about building awareness and a culture where you kind of set up tripwires or triggers where people can actually recognize ethical problems, evaluate those, decide and act, and to make sound decisions. Sound decisions about what you'll do and what you won't do, and how you're going to do what you've decided to do. Because the what and the how of AI, and especially in this generative AI world, is important. So we see that in the materials and in the survey. So nearly 70% of respondents who are actually steeped in AI, they're concerned about bias, and bias becoming more prevalent in the broader economy, the broader spectrum. We see that kind of same percentage, 68% of people in the survey that responded are concerned just generally about AI and the negative impacts that it's going to have on their organizations. And the way those kind of lay out, the top 3 drivers that the respondents thought were important were regulatory risk drivers, market disruption risk drivers. Both of those are things that are traditional. We know those, and it's important that they stay there because AI magnifies everything, right? And then kind of a new one, I haven't really seen this in the top 3 before, is this idea of intellectual property loss. And I think that's being driven by the use of generative AI and the concern that organizations have around making sure that their confidential information is protected.
Yeah, and when I looked at this, I was a little surprised, not really at the top 3 so much because of all that's happening in Europe and the conversation starting in the US around regulation, but really overall reputation I thought would be higher. Customer impacts I thought would be higher as well, but I think that's probably just not a function of that they're less important, but it's probably an evolution. I think these are, the regulatory is certainly front and center and probably is just overshadowing those others, as well as the disruption as strategies start to get adjusted for a new world driven by Gen AI. So, well, let's get into Gen AI. And clearly we saw yesterday for the quick straw poll show of hands, most people overwhelmingly are using Gen AI in some way, and let me just break that down. Basically, the survey said there's 3 camps. There's most people, about 74%, are using it in some targeted way. They're applying it to a specific use case. They're using it to run certain experiments, but there isn't really broad-based use in their organization yet. So most of us are in that category. 16% have very broad-based use. So those are folks that are taking a very distributed approach to the use of that technology. And then there's about 10%, whether it's conscious or whether they just haven't implemented it yet, really aren't using Gen AI in total. But with that said, then we start looking at the risks associated with that. And go ahead and take us through what you saw there.
Yeah, so here again, we're seeing our concerned pragmatists here. There's concern, and it shows up significantly that there's some level of concern around privacy violations. There's some level of concern around undetected bias. These we expect and are at the top. Then we're seeing some interesting additional concerns around reliability and explainability. IP violations show up again. We just talked about those and why they're important. And these reliability and explainability are well placed, and they're emerging factors. And those emerging factors can drive risk into those areas that Bob was saying he thought was unusual, that it's a little low on the previous slide. Areas like your organization's reputation, customer attrition, employee engagement. If you don't have reliable AI, if you don't know how to explain your AI, those are the types of risks that you'll start to see realized.
Okay, well now let's go forward and let's look at, and this time we looked at the executive level, so those are C-suite, those are the most senior level folks that were surveyed. And we wanted to ask the question, how did they get started? What was unique about that journey? And so the data started to tell us, there's some clusters here that said about half of the executives really took a lot of deep personal involvement. They went to school They, in spite of the fact they probably were working heavily with AI in some way, shape, or form, when Gen AI came out, they were spending more than 20 hours just immersed in learning about this new technology and how it impacts the organization. So that was an important first step. About that same percentage also was focused on the tone at the top, the messaging from their organization out. And so this is proactive. They weren't waiting for a crisis. They wanted to make sure that the culture of the organization understood the importance of responsible AI, or AI and data ethics. So that, I thought, was really great to see. And there's another percentage that's not represented here, but those that we're still messaging it, but maybe not as strongly. So I think clearly the tone that people are setting is a critical first. And then the other thing, they put their money where their mouth is. So 68% have dedicated responsible AI resources associated with it. And so that's really important. That's setting the stage for starting to get accountabilities defined, processes, starting to understand the governance and the training associated in order to activate the organization around the use of these technologies.
Yeah, and so I think what we're seeing on the next slide is that these 68% of organizations that have dedicated some people, those people are actually doing work. And it's showing up in the way they're addressing governance. So more than 50% and more than 60% are developing elements of governance. And we can see that they're setting policies, they're defining things. Definitions are important. They're building kind of guiding principles and putting up those guardrails that they need to move forward in their objectives for responsible AI. And the other thing that we've seen here is that, not in the survey, but we've seen it outside of the survey, is the guiding principles are an important part of really describing what an organization does. And many organizations are actually, since they want to participate in kind of that public conversation about responsible AI, are actually publishing their principles. And they do that with an objective to inform their customers about how they're going to do responsible AI and how they're going to produce better products and better services for their customers. So it's an important, if it's a lever that organizations want to pull, it's an important lever to start building that customer trust, because not only is it important to you what you do and how you do it, it's really important to your customers what you do and how you do it.
Okay, well, let's continue looking at activating responsible AI and AI and data ethics. Let's go now, again, with the executive view. Let's look at the related training that their organizations are doing. So what we see here is, 67% are doing some type of AI risk-related training. So they're making the organization more aware of the risks associated with that. And you can see the various levels of maturity associated with that. But in general, that's very, very positive. The other thing we looked at, and related to that, not just the risk, but now we get into more of the ethics training in particular. So these are the things that are going to help people make good decisions in a Gen AI world. What we found, and not unsurprising, 78% have some type of business ethics program and training already in place today. So that was really important, and that's business ethical decision making. Many of you probably take annual courses related to that today. 32% take an extra step, and what I mean by that is they actually augment that training program for AI related ethics, and so that was still reasonably healthy, that actually have that in place today. But the number I really want to focus on is this 27%. That's the number that inside the ethics training, they are using a structured framework. And this is important because, you can go back to our discussion of policy and that's all well and good, but it's hard to memorize and actually activate off of a policy. Yeah. They're quite often in legalese, they're very wordy, they're used to guide requirements and other things, but in terms of activating the organization, they're problematic. And so a framework helps simplify that for an organization. And so that at first blush appeared to be a difference maker in terms of those that really have more deeply activated with your organization. But Gwen, take us through, a bit more detail about what a framework looks like, what it does, and why it's important.
Yeah, so a framework, they're really important. We have abstract, complex problems, especially in Gen AI, ethics and responsibility around that. And so those frameworks define a scope and boundaries, so we can put these things in a box and understand them from there. And it provides clear focus for people to rally around in complicated scenarios. It also creates standards and a common language. And Bob, a common language is so important for literacy. If you're going to start a literacy program, you have to have a common language. You train on that, and people come out talking the same language. And so those are important. The other thing it provides is a consistent method. And if you have a consistent method, you can use those methods in a variety of your business processes. So you can use them around strategic decision making. You can use them around technology assessments, data curation. And what we found that evidence in the survey itself of how important frameworks really are. And we'll see that on the next slide. So what we found was that for organizations that had used and trained on a framework, that 27% circle Bob had there, that they have a much higher activation rate in some of the core and common ethical and responsible AI principles than those without a framework. And as an example here on the left-hand side, that is a KPMG data and AI ethics framework. There are many frameworks that are out there. Standard institutions are producing frameworks. You'll see the technology companies producing frameworks, a lot of frameworks out there. But what we notice about those frameworks is that they all kind of rally around about 7 or 8 common principles that are part of AI and AI ethics. And we included 7 of those common principles in the survey. Accountability. So accountability is really about maintaining the responsibility of humans in the loop. And those people that we put in the loop, they're supposed to recognize, evaluate for ethical concerns, and then decide and act in an accountable manner, accountable to the regulatory requirements that you have, the company values that you may have, ethical standards that you've set, and your diversity objectives. Fairness, it makes sure that we are equitable in our treatment of everyone. We're eliminating bias, identifying any kind of harmful or impactful outcomes of AI that we want to avoid. But the other, I think, important thing about fairness is making sure that technology is accessible to everyone. So we saw Clara yesterday, right? Everybody liked that, right? Everybody liked Clara. That was like so cool, right? She is accessible she's bilingual to people who speak English and people who speak Spanish. And I'm thankful that they developed it in English so that I can use her as well. I'm really excited about that. Explainability is ensuring that the recommendations and predictions that come out of AI are explainable and transparent. And that needs to be in 2 stakeholder groups. The first stakeholder group is the people using those predictions and recommendations to make decisions. Think a loan officer looking at a mortgage application. And so that loan officer needs to understand what they're seeing and how to make a decision based on that. But it passes through. The loan officer then needs to be able to explain the results and the outcome to the loan applicant as well. So explainability, if you have it, builds trust with your clients. Even if there's a bad outcome, it builds trust with them. Safety is, processes and procedures and also guidelines and principles that you have in place to address any sort of negative impact to humans, property, or the environment. And those are usually implemented with some sort of a fail-safe control. Reliability is really how is this system operating consistently within the bounds of what we've defined it to do? So use is important. We've defined it to do something, and we'll test it within those bounds. Also, that the results that we get are consistent and accurate, and it's reliable that way. Privacy and data integrity, those last 2 we're very familiar with, but they get magnified with generative AI. Privacy, we really want to make sure that we're protecting folks' data and not exposing their personal data. But the other side of the coin for this is it's really easy to just kind of swoop up data that you have in your organization to use in some sort of an AI project for training or something like that. You have to make sure, and this principle would do that, that you have, it's first of all, it was collected for that use, that it's even relevant, and that you have actual consent to do that. And the last one is data integrity. We all know that quality of data is important, what goes in, what comes out, and we want to look for bias. But the other interesting part about data integrity is this principle can help you understand, am I compliant with when I procure data? Is it procured, appropriately through compared to a regulation compliance? So, yeah. So what we found here was,
Maybe go back. Yeah.
So what we really found here was that each one of these principles can be used in those business processes I talked to you about. But if you combine those principles into a framework, you have a common language and a method now to actually manage AI risk. And so the graph here, what it's showing is that if you have a framework, these principles can be activated 3 to 4 times more than someone without a framework. And when we think about a change perspective here, from change and changing the culture, we were talking about awareness, right? And changing the culture and setting up triggers. The framework, and if you have those governance elements, you have those training elements, and augment it with a framework, it's a game changer for embedding these kind of responsible principles in your organization.
Okay, well, let's look at the last set of insights, and this is all around where folks are going from a strategic, from an investment standpoint over the next year. And this insight just starts to show clearly privacy and integrity. These are the more traditional areas of focus. So no surprise that those are front and center and dominant here. But you do see reliability, safety, explainability, and fairness to counteract some of that bias start to enter into people's budgets and strategies. So that was good to see, and I would expect over time that those actually will grow. The one surprise as we looked at this was just accountability was there, but it was just somewhat of like an afterthought, and it seems like decisions involving AI and data ethics are often decentralized. The need for accountability built into your AI and data ethics program is going to be critical. It's going to help you insulate against some of that generative AI risk that we talked about earlier. So just some additional thoughts. Gwen, anything else on that?
No, I think all we have left is the recap here.
Yeah, so we've gone through a ton of stats. It's a lot to take in, especially on the verge of wrapping up the conference. But let's just spend a little bit of time, Gwen, just hitting the highlights.
Yeah, so I think this is the last slide. So if anybody has any questions, if they want to come up to the mic, now would be a good time to do that, and we can get to a couple of questions, or we can probably even see hands in here if you have them. But this is the wrap up. So what we're seeing is that generative AI is used predominantly in the organizations. 82% of organizations are using generative AI in some way. And that is driving risk and concern. We have the risk of bias. We have the risk of just negative impacts that we talked about in regulation or IP loss and market disruption. But executives are doing something about it. That's the important part. They're learning, they're messaging, they're dedicating resources, and those resources are, setting clear standards and that sort of thing. They're also investing. So they're investing in those traditional places where it's important, privacy and integrity, because those things get magnified. But they're also focusing on other areas that are non-traditional, so bias and explainability. We still have, as Bob mentioned, that I think accountability stands out as not activated. That's a lever that can be pulled to really progress the culture, the awareness of ethical AI in your organization. So that's left there. And the last thing I think we want to say is you need to get started. To get started on your governance programs and putting together those components of definitions, guidelines, and policies. And then your training can go next. And then you've got your frameworks where you can actually realize the common language and educate your teams so that you're all speaking the same language and have behaviors and practices.
Okay, well, so thanks for your time.
We got a question over here.
Oh, yep. Yeah, we will publish the report in about a month's time, so you'll have access to all this and more. And yes. Yeah,
thank you. Thank you for this thought-provoking time. So I actually have a couple questions. So when you mentioned about 20, like the hours spent learning around this, like what are the resources that you would recommend to get started? And then Reverend Russell, I have also a question for you, which is it's really refreshing to see, we've talked a lot about diversity of all shapes and sizes and all of that and diversity of thought, but with your background, like you're a reverend, like how did you pivot, or how was a little bit maybe about your journey into AI ethics, because I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, well, Bob, do you want to answer the training question?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of, there's institutes, like KPMG has an institute where we provide access to how we view the framework, but there's other foundations. NIST has a lot of AI and ethic-related risks that they really map pretty well to those 7 that we showed today. So that's a starting point. Again, I think focusing on a framework first and viewing the ethics journey more as a cultural and decision-making journey, and don't get so caught up in all the controls and the weeds on this. This is something that is a journey that not just the IT organization has to take, it's everyone in the organization, given how pervasive Gen AI is. So we've got to think about it in terms of multiple personas, in terms of how this information needs to be packaged and distributed within the organization. But what else would you add?
Yeah, I think that's a good start for the training. Yep. And if you develop those frameworks or the definitions, all those sorts of things, you can develop your own training because you'll have your own definitions, right, and your own goals. So, yep. Yeah. So thank you for the question. That's so kind. I would like to say that there was some planned path to get here, but it really started when Bob and I became colleagues and were working together. And as we talked about the emerging topics and what's going on, and he presented to me, what about ethics? And so I have a lot of training in theology and philosophy, and so I thought, this really sounds interesting to me, because I do spend my time with people on the weekends, helping them solve problems, and we can't just say it's too abstract, right? In the real world, we have to be able to solve problems, and so bringing that, so I prayerfully thought about that, and decided that I thought this might be a way that I can, help people take a complex problem and actually be practical and put practices together for it. So, thank you. Question?
Yeah, thank you for sharing these insights. That was very thought-provoking. My question is, as you reviewed all of this, did anything stand out as either different from data you had seen in the past or otherwise surprising as you poured through all of this data?
Yeah, I think the surprising part, and we shouldn't have been surprised by it, is the one chart where we had the risk drivers that people are concerned about, and those top 3. The rest of the organization reputation, the customer attrition, the employee engagement, all low compared to those 3. And I'm not exactly sure why, because those are those emerging risks that if we're not prepared for those, and people are concerned, but they haven't made the connection between I need to be concerned with reliability, and explainability, but here's the risk drivers for those areas. So I probably shouldn't have been surprised by that, because those risks aren't activated yet, right? We're not realizing them, but we should be prepared if we're going to.
I mean, I thought they'd be higher just because the media is so finely tuned to any missteps in this space. So I thought that would be, much more dominant on people's radar screen. But clearly the competitive pressures and just the unknowns of what's evolving in DC, trumped a lot of that. The other thing is just on a framework side. I mean, we knew, and we've had a framework for some time, but the value of a common language, conceptually you get it. But when you actually look at the data and you see the difference it makes, the ability to codify different personas, different groups within your organization, have them start to internalize how they need to deal with this new thing coming at them called Gen AI, I think was important, definitely an important takeaway. Thanks. Okay, Omar, I guess for the wrap. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate it.